Hey, everybody, and thank you for coming to today's episode of Caserta's Data Intelligence webinar series. Today we have Doug Laney. Hey, Doug.
Hey, Remy, how's it going?
From Chicago. Good, and I am coming to you guys from Los Angeles, California. So a few years back, I was actually at MIT at a symposium, the MIT CDO IQ Symposium. And it's this awesome annual event in Cambridge on campus. And I was listening to a presentation about a topic that I had not heard before. And that topic was Infonomics. And in this presentation, I heard excellent examples and case studies that were all about a different way to look at data. And is this data valuable? And what is it? And where did it come from? And the whole concept behind it. And the man presenting that presentation was no other than Doug Laney, who we have here today. Just to show you all how excited I really was, I have proof. I asked him afterwards, after the presentation, which I loved, for an autographed copy. This was before I met Doug. This is his book. I have it on my bookshelf today.
All right.
It says, Remy, great seeing you at MIT. Keep being info savvy. And that's what today is all about. It's about how do we get all of you to be info savvy. And that's CDOs, data analytics leaders, and aspiring ones. So today's topic is all about how to turn your data management from a cost center into a profit center. And that is deep in the world of Infonomics. So today you're going to learn all about how to manage your data, how to measure your data, and how to monetize your data. And Doug will be talking about how we've done this for many of our Caserta clients and helped them be very successful both in their positions and their companies, as well as other examples from the world of leading organizations, how they've really extracted value from their data and put it to work. Doug, take it away. Stage is all yours. One more bit of housekeeping. Please, we encourage you to ask any questions you have during the presentation. There's a panel to ask questions. We will address them at the end of the presentation. And yes, I will send you a recording afterwards to the email address you provided. Thank you. Doug, all yours.
Folks can pump their questions into the chat window. Yeah, excellent. All right, we'll keep an eye on that. Great. Hey, good afternoon, everyone from Chicago. I hope you and yours are keeping well and enjoying summer as safely as possible. I learned from Remy that we're both decided to do the ultimate social distancing. We're both boating, so
that's right.
We joined a boat club. Remy is learning to be a captain, so there we go. It's a good idea. Nothing more socially distant than that. All right, so let's move along here. We've covered this on previous webinars. We've talked about the Infonomics, and so I'm not going to belabor it, but I do want to kind of revisit the topic and give you a little bit of a thumbnail on it for those who may not be familiar. We'll do a little level setting. And so the idea behind Infonomics is that we find that a lot of companies, a lot of organizations just don't manage their data as well as they can. And this leads to kind of an underperformance in terms of how that data is delivering value for the organization. And what we're kind of our hypothesis is that most companies don't measure the value of their data. They don't measure its potential value. They don't measure its actual value. They don't measure, even for a lot of organizations, their quality characteristics. And there's the old adage that you can't manage what you don't measure, or you can't manage what you don't measure well. And so we believe that doing great things with data really starts with measuring it and understanding those kinds of characteristics. But I think it also follows that you can't monetize what you're not managing well. And for a lot of organizations, this ends up becoming kind of a vicious cycle of not measuring, therefore not managing, therefore not monetizing data well. And by monetizing, we don't necessarily mean selling data. We'll talk about a variety of ways that you could generate economic benefits from data. So the idea behind Infonomics is to kind of reverse the curse, as it were, as we say here in Chicago, which we did a few years ago with the Chicago Cubs baseball. But the idea is to reverse that curse, and by understanding the measurements and qualities of data, we're in a better position to manage it better. And once we're managing it more like an actual asset, then we're in a better position to generate more value from it. But I'm going to focus on kind of that value side today. We're not going to talk a lot about costs and measuring data. We're going to talk about the variety of ways that organizations are generating economic benefits from data, innovating, transforming, and so forth. But with that in mind, let's just talk for a second about the cost of data management. So whether we know it or we think about it or not as data professionals, our mission is really to help our organizations collect or generate data, do things to that data to make its potential value greater. We're not always in a position to be monetizing that data directly, but we're definitely in a position as data leaders and information professionals to increase the potential value of that data. It's kind of more of a continuum. There are things that we do to collect and generate data. There's things that we do to increase its potential value, and then there's things that we do to help deliver that data with the expectation that it's generating some economic benefits for our organization or for others. This really falls into kind of three main categories. So you may know me as like the 3 V's guy, the one who came up with the volume, velocity, and variety, which are used generally to describe big data. I tend to come up with these things to make them easier for me to remember. So this is kind of the 3 A's here about acquiring and administering and applying data. And on the last slide,
You
you saw
also have the
3
3
M's.
M's.
3 M's, right? The monetizing, managing, and measuring. So I'm a bit simplistic that way, and it kind of helps me remember things. But yeah, so the cost of data management really is kind of threefold here. There's things that we're doing to collect and generate data. There are things that we're doing to process that data to make it more potentially valuable, more usable, and then there are things we do to deliver that data to apply it in a business context. So let's look at some of those, and these are just a few. So if we look at the kinds of things that we're doing as information professionals, I mean, we look at this too long, it'll give us a headache, more than we already have as IT professionals. And this is really just kind of the tip of the iceberg. There are so many things that organizations do with data. It typically involves a host of technologies and skills and processes. The average Fortune 1000 company we analyzed a number of years ago uses upwards of 200 distinct technologies involved in acquiring and administering and applying data. The costs really add up fast, and moving to the cloud can help a bit, but it simply kind of obscures the underlying technologies that are used and converts those costs from more of a capital expense to an operational expense, which is fine. But how many companies actually measure the contribution of their data-related expenses to the top or bottom line financial numbers? And pretty much none. And why? Because it's difficult to do. And besides, accountants don't consider data to be an asset. Don't get me started on that subject. We've talked about that on previous webinars, but basically the accountants have recently doubled down on their antiquated notions that data is not a balance sheet asset, even though it clearly meets the criteria of an asset. It's something that's owned and controlled, exchangeable for cash, and generates probable future economic value, and something that's separable from other assets. So it clearly meets the criteria. It's just that the accountants haven't really, they're steeped in this 1930s style kind of age of what an asset means. And that's really probably why we're not measuring the value of data. But you shouldn't really rely on what the accountants say as to how you behave as an organization, which is why we definitely recommend valuing data. Now, I'm not going to share the data valuation models that we've developed today. I'm going to focus more on kind of the outcomes. Like I said, in previous webinars, I've covered how we can measure the value of information and how some organizations actually have done this for significant enterprise benefits. But again, today we're going to focus directly on the data-related opportunities, kind of what form they take, and how you as a data and analytics leader can help make it happen instead of kind of just sitting and waiting for the business to come to you with ideas. But first, let me talk about a couple of stories of missed opportunities from my own experience. One is personal, one is more on the professional side. And once you start looking for these kinds of ideas, you see them everywhere. And no, doing great things with data doesn't necessarily require big data or big brains or big algorithms, really just big, wide open eyes. So let me tell you a couple of these stories. The first is, we moved recently, we moved homes, and when you move homes in the US and in other countries, your home goes into a database. In the US, it's the MLS, the multiple listing service database, which basically is kind of public record. It's available through aggregators like who are the folks who like the real estate aggregators. I can't think of any right now. Remy, you know who they are. You just moved. So
like Zillow?
Zillow, right? Yeah, Zillow and yeah.
Street Easy, Twilio.
Yeah. So basically it's public record. And so we moved recently and our house goes into the, the database. And, if you've moved recently, who starts calling you? Kind of the fly-by-night mortgage companies and the moving companies and the moving box companies and the landscapers and the painters all start, descending on you when you're for sale. But what company didn't contact us was really a surprise to me. It was our own bank. And I have like a 40-year relationship with this bank through a series of acquisitions. I won't name names, but you might be able to guess who they are. They're one of the probably largest banks in the US and in the world. And I've stayed with them because I have like a 7-digit account number, which hasn't been extended, which I like. But anyway, just out of convenience. And so they don't, so they didn't reach out to me. What an incredibly missed opportunity. I mean, when is the #1 time when somebody changes banks? When they move, right? Or when they get married or divorced or have some kind of life event like that. And so I was thinking, what an incredibly missed opportunity for them to, one, offer me a mortgage, right? Hey, you're moving, can we offer you a mortgage? Two, can we offer you a home equity line, maybe to do some things to the house that you're buying? Can we introduce you to your new branch? We know you're moving from somewhere to somewhere else. We don't know where exactly, but we want to, introduce you to your new branch and get you, know where it is and get you introduced. Can we print you new checks, right? Your checks need a new address on them. Can we help you move the stuff in your safe deposit box? So there's a lot of ways reasons for them to contact us based on that life event, but they didn't, and it was an incredible missed opportunity for them. And I was thinking, how hard would it be? This is not rocket science, not data science. How hard would it have been for them to hire, some teenager, give him or her a can of Red Bull and a bunch of munchies and say, hey, match the MLS database to our customer list on a daily or weekly basis, and then spit out who's moving so we can reach out to them. You want to know what those life events are for your people, for your customers, and take that opportunity to reach out to them. Don't let it pass you by. Another similar opportunity also in kind of the banking world was I met with the CIO of a small kind of regional bank in the Northeast, and I met with the CIO and his team, and he said, "Listen, we've got we've got this problem." I said, "Well, what is it?" He said, "Well, our customers are dying. We're losing customers because they're dying. We have these high net wealth individuals. They're in their 70s and 80s and older, and we're losing customers because they're dying." And so the next question I asked was probably one you would ask as well. It was kind of obvious. I said, "Well, what's happening to their wealth when they die?" And the obvious answer to that is, well, their children are inheriting it. So I asked, okay, well, do you know who their children are? Have you developed a relationship with them? Have you done anything to reach out to these kids over the years to develop some kind of relationship, to encourage them to want to do business with kind of a stodgy old bank, or to do things kind of in the digital realm to attract them to your bank? And he's like, yeah, no, we haven't done any of that. And I'm just thinking again, how stupid simple is it just to identify? You probably have the records of the inheritance data, next of kin and all of that. So why not develop a relationship with them and reach out to them and, in some way? You don't have to be overt about it, but it's an incredible missed opportunity for them. So, he's like, well, I said, if I were your CIO, I wouldn't be too pleased with this. And, I might fire you. So he kind of got the message, and we embarked on a kind of a discussion of how to move things along. Anyway, so one of the major ways to generate value from data, as you're probably well aware, is by applying analytics. Unfortunately, and most of this value derives from analytics, and just as like we crave. So we talk about the value of information, but information is kind of like this raw thing. And just as we crave bread, and sometimes we crave flour to bake our own bread. In fact, there's a lot of demand for flour right now because everybody's at home baking, which has subsided a bit in the summer here. But so some interesting stories on that and how they track the demand. Anyway, the point is that we crave bread and flour, but and data needs to be processed just as grains of wheat do. We don't go out hunting for grains of wheat. We want it processed in some way. And this is really what analytics does for us. It makes data more consumable. So you're probably already familiar with the analytics ascendancy model that we developed at Gartner, and it involves descriptive analytics, which describes what has happened in the past, diagnostic analytics, which answers the question why something's happening, predictive analytics, which answers the question how can we what's going to happen in the future, and then prescriptive analytics, which answers the question how can we make something happen. Unfortunately, most organizations are still kind of in a rut, spending most of their time and money on analytics that continue to build pretty pie charts and bouncy bar charts and dashing dashboards, just as we did in the 1990s, and even using some technologies that we used in the 90s. There's always going to be a need for descriptive analytics, so I'm not kind of discounting that, but for things like compliance reporting and so forth. And this really isn't necessarily a maturity model for that reason. It's a way of thinking more broadly about the styles of analytics that are going to deliver value for the organization. So listen, I've over the years, I've compiled over 500 examples of how organizations are using data and analytics in high order ways, and almost none of them have anything to do with that hindsight-oriented analytics. They all have to do with more of the advanced kind of analytics, the insights and the foresight kind of analytics. But what exactly is holding back our organizations? And when we look at that, there are a number of things that are listed here that are holding us back. We have this kind of inertia. We've always been doing it this way. The problems are easy. We don't need a lot of data. The data doesn't need to be integrated. The skills are not too significant. And so it's pretty easy for any kind of organization to say, hey, I'm going to go build some pie charts and try to understand our business a little bit better, try to make some better decisions. But again, the high order value-oriented proposition for analytics is on the right side of this chart. And so as data and analytics leaders, we need to help our organizations overcome these challenges. We need to plan ahead. We need to help change the culture. We need to introduce things like data literacy programs and help business people envision the art of the possible with data. Sure, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, like these stories that I just shared, but most of the advanced analytic solutions involve more complex problems requiring serious analytic skills, massive and fast-moving data that comes from a wide range of sources. And today, especially, rather than directing analytic output at eyeballs, you really need to be focused on directing analytic output at business processes, automated business processes, and systems themselves. We as humans don't move as fast as the computers and systems do. And so when we as architects of data solutions and analytic solutions are thinking about delivering analytics, we should not entirely forget about delivering it at eyeballs, but we should be focused more on delivering it at machines themselves. And this has some interesting economic implications as well that we'll get to later on. All right, so I want to share, we've been doing kind of an ongoing study of Infonomics, and and the question is, who's leading the charge here? Too often we find among our clients that their data and analytics efforts are kind of rudderless, or perhaps really, they have really smart developers and maybe even data scientists, but with insufficient, senior leadership or sponsorship. So if we're really going to stop just talking about data as an asset, then we really need kind of true data executives, and you know who I'm talking about. But most CIOs will admit that they're really, if you get down to it and you really talk to them, that they're really just chief infrastructure officers, more focused on technology and application development or staffing and outsourcing than on data itself as a primary concern. And this is where the role of the chief data officer comes in, and perhaps a chief analytics officer as well, depending on the size and scope of your organization. I've been studying these roles for years and wanted to share some of our findings. So first here, we found that organizations with a chief data officer are 3 times more likely to generate non-monetary commercial value for their organizations, and 7 times more likely to generate monetary value from their data externally by externalizing it. We'll talk about that in a minute. We also find that organizations with a chief data officer are 4 times more likely to be using data to transform their business, their processes, their services, and so forth. And those with what we call a CDO light, somebody who's has the title but really is an executive at the same level as a CIO and CFO, are still 2 times more likely to be generating this kind of benefit. And then finally, we find organizations with chief data officers are 3 times more likely to share data freely across business units, rather than these business units hoarding data and not sharing it across business throughout the business. Just by virtue of having a CDO, that kind of opens things up, and those silos tend to dissipate. All right, so let's talk about the methods to monetize data. And just having a senior leader isn't enough. You really have to have a framework for conceptualizing the ideas for generating economic benefits from data. And we've covered this framework in detail in previous webinars, which are available on demand, right, Remy? I'm just going to give a kind of an overview of the methods here. So there's a few ways to look at generating value from data. We can look at it internally or indirectly. We can also look at monetizing data externally or more directly. And there's a variety of ways when we look across the ways that we and others have generated value from data that kind of breaks down into. And there are different people who have categorized this different ways. There's my friend Barb Wixom with MIT's Center for Information Strategy Research, I think that's what it is called, who's done some really great work on this. And she kind of categorizes a little bit differently. This is the framework that we use. So you can use data to improve business processes or effectiveness. You can use data to identify opportunities for new products or markets. You can use data to build and solidify partner relationships, supplier relationships, customer relationships. And then you can do something like what we call publish a branded index. Like if you've got data available that you want to make available to others, the way to advertise that is to create a branded index. You know something about your market, publish a branded index. A great example of this is ADP, the payroll processing company. And they have, they actually collect a lot of data on payrolls, and they have a data products business where they make data available to others as data as a product, data as a service. And they advertise this by publishing certain indices. One of them is a jobs index, which is known to be, more accurate and more timely than the US government's own numbers. So they don't publish this just to kind of poke a finger in the eye of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. They publish it to advertise to the market that they've got additional data beneath the covers here that can be usable for things like, hey, planning COVID recovery, the economic recovery, and other things, or planning where are shifts in staffing, shifts in skills, what kind of people tend to leave the role after a certain amount of time and so forth. So they can really help organizations in understanding staffing related movements. And then you can kind of layer that data maybe with other data from folks like Monster.com or Indeed to get a much better picture. But anyway, so that's what a branded index is. And then you can also monetize data externally or directly by bartering or trading with it. And I'm going to share some examples where you can use it to enhance your existing products or services. So think about any product or service that you offer today and how you can make that better, more competitive, more usable, more differentiating by baking data into it. Again, I'm going to share some examples of that. Or you can sell data directly, either yourself, if you want to kind of set up a system to do that, which is not terribly difficult, and we've helped clients do that. Recently, we worked with a pharmaceutical company in the pharmaceutical industry to identify, they've estimated $50 to $100 million of latent value in their data. So we're working through that process with them to figure out how to deliver data products for their suppliers and partners in the marketplace to realize that value internally and externally. And then you can also do this through data brokers or data marketplaces like Dowx or Demas Data or Eagle Alpha. And there's a bunch of data aggregators where you can sell your data through. Or you can just offer insights and analyses, kind of like what, I used to work with Gartner, and what Gartner does, they don't sell the raw data from their surveys, they sell the aggregate data in terms of analysis and reports. And because data can be monetized in a variety of ways simultaneously, it's what economists call a non-rivalrous asset, they monetize it in multiple ways. They monetize it in analyst reports, in analyst interactions, in conferences and webinars, and on their kind of strategy consulting side as well. So there's a variety of ways you can monetize data simultaneously by offering insights and analyses as well. And then the final one here is there's something that I didn't write about in the book, but that's come up more recently with some of our clients, and that is certainly, particularly in light of GDPR and other privacy, consumer privacy regulations like the California Privacy Act, where, listen, I can't sell you my customer data, but I can sell your stuff to my customers and take a cut of that. And so we refer to that as inverted data monetization. For example, let's say I'm a hospital and I know who my diabetes patients are, but I can't sell that data to you due to HIPAA and plenty of other regulations. But if you're the purveyor of healthy meal plans or at-home glucose monitoring kits or maybe gym memberships, I can make that information available to my customers and perhaps take a referral fee or a commission, based on that. So that's what we call inverted data monetization. So if anybody tells you, hey, we can't monetize our customer data, tell them that Doug says that's BS. You can actually monetize your customer data. You just need to flip that. You just need to flip that model. Okay, let's get into some fun ways that organizations are actually going about this. I'm going to share 12 inspirational examples. Like I said, I've got hundreds of these stories, and I'm in the process of writing a book on it, which hopefully will be out in the fall, where I'm going to share kind of the art of the possible with data and analytics and tons of inspirational examples. Now, the basis of this is a question that we often get as consultants, which is from our clients, what are others in my industry doing? And my flippant response to that is, why do you want to be in second place or third place? Why not take ideas from other industries and maybe be the first one in your industry to capitalize on that idea for monetizing data? So as we look through these, kind of forget about what industry it's in. Think about how you would apply this kind of concept to your own business, your own organization, okay? Some of them are in banking, many of them are in retail, but some in manufacturing, some in public sector. But again, think about, kind of tease them apart, and as you're thinking about them, think about, oh, why couldn't we do this in our organization or in our business? All right, so here we go. So kind of a first fishy story here. When the Georgia Aquarium opened, it hosted 3 million visitors in its first year. With it has like 120,000 animals and 8 million gallons of water. It's the largest aquarium in the world at the time. It may still be. It didn't have to do any marketing whatsoever. Within a few years, it found that the attendance had dropped quite precipitously. So the aquarium added things like theme parks and other kinds of attractions, but that didn't really work out. And after analyzing their customer satisfaction data versus crowds and spending and profits, they realized that they were asking the wrong question. Hypotheses are really important. And so not asking about what happened, but why things are happening, or if we did this, would X, if we did X, would Y happen? Generating those kinds of hypotheses are really difficult for most business people. And so as data and analytics leaders, we really need to help them do that. Anyway, so they said, the question isn't how to bring in more customers, but how to bring in the right customers. And so they, by creating demographic profiles of individuals and households and postal codes data and compiling sales and on-site traffic data, they were able to predict which kind of media would be most effective for reaching potential visitors. And that they ended up parlaying this into a model. And then with only $700,000 increase in media spend, they parlayed that into an $8 million annual revenue gain. So next one here, sometimes selling information is a preferable alternative to no revenue at all. And so a lot of companies are thinking about this right now and kind of approaching us and saying, hey, listen, our revenue, certain revenue streams have declined due to the kind of the economic COVID-inspired economic crisis. And so we're looking for new revenue streams. And we've written some articles about this. I've published recently in Forbes about this. But here's an actual example. So sometimes the information that you have is in the form of processes and procedures, not just structured transaction data. We're always thinking about our customer data and our transaction data, but there's a lot of other data in our organization that might be valuable to others. And you'll often say one person's trash is another person's treasure. So kind of think deeply about the dark data or the hidden data that you have that isn't currently providing a lot of value to you, and you're kind of squeezing it as much as you can internally, but maybe it's a benefit to somebody else. So I worked with the CEO of a mid-size US manufacturing company of sonic buoys and other kinds of what they call inertial sensors. And he shared with me how they're losing business to lower cost manufacturers in China and elsewhere. And so we advised them on how perhaps they should be licensing, they're the best in the industry in terms of the process, the manufacturing, the QA processes for manufacturing these things and maintaining them. And so we advise them on how to license this expertise, how to package and license this expertise in the form of detailed manufacturing testing processes to those who would otherwise be undercutting them on bids. So what ended up happening was that their competitors became partners, and this whole new revenue stream materialized. And the CEO then was able to take credit for turning around a flailing and failing manufacturing company. Here's a fun story. A few years ago, when I first spoke to the budding entrepreneurs of a company called True Optic, they were gushing to me about this new file system they developed for managing big data. And I told them, yeah, you know what, everybody and their brother has some kind of upstart data management company that they're claiming can, outperform, in data analysis. And so I said, all right, so how do you know? How have you proved this? How have you demonstrated it? And they said, what we've done is we have captured the high velocity, high volume BitTorrent traffic on millions of videos and music and software and games and other content being, bootlegged mostly via the peer-to-peer torrent net protocol. And I said, well, that's great. Well, how many have you captured? They said, everything. We've captured every single item being exchanged on BitTorrent, where it's coming from, where it's going to, what it contains. And it instantly occurred to me that this information was as or more valuable than their technology. And so I suggested they consider pivoting into a data products company. So within months of working with them on this, True Optic had flipped the script, and today they're the leading OTT, or what's called over-the-top data and insights provider, with major networks around the world subscribing to their service. You're probably familiar with like the Nielsen ratings. Well, one of the things that they can do, or claim they can do, is they can predict Nielsen TV ratings a full week before Nielsen produces them. Think about the value that has to those in the media marketplace. All right, another fun story here. Throughout the early 2011 and 2012, a guy named Noah Barden, I think is how his name is pronounced, was looking to expand the presence of his company's mobile mapping app throughout South America. And he met with various providers of mapping information to get access to his proprietary geographic data. But he wasn't about to pay with the limited precious cash that he had. In fact, he didn't have a lot of cash. Instead, what he did is he bartered with the data that his app collected on automobile traffic, on road work, on accidents, police locations, and eventually a company called Multispectral went for the deal. And within the year, Waze became available to Brazilian drivers. So as Barden said, it would have taken us a year and a half to get there on our own by going the traditional VC route or by bootstrapping. So think about how you can leverage data in ways that you're currently leveraging cash. Now, I understand it's not a balance sheet asset, but there are organizations out there that will recognize the value of your cash and provide backing for your organization. Intuit's TurboTax is another classic example of a service differentiated by both extracting and inserting information into its product. So Intuit, which owns TurboTax, compiles data from millions of tax returns prepared using its software. And as more customers migrate to its online software as a service version, Intuit's able to collect more and more data on the usage of its product, but also the details of users' tax returns. And since they also offer a kind of an audit defense program, they can track that data as well. So this kind of de-informationalization of the product, basically taking our tax return data along with the information it compiles on tax audits, enables Intuit to informationalize its product further with the data and analytics on tax audit risks and probabilities. So, and this helps it differentiate from some other products, and certainly from human tax preparers who by comparison can only guess at your audit propensity based on kind of their limited personal experience. And even if Intuit could monetize this data more directly by selling it to others, instead baking it into its own offering creates a more valuable product, one which it can defensively raise the price of each year, and which by doing so rather than selling the data externally causes less reputational risk. And if it isn't already obvious to you, Intuit isn't just monetizing our own tax returns through its core functionality, it's monetizing the entire US tax code itself. The US tax code it's a veritable mountain of information, having grown from about, I think, 500 pages in the 1800s to over 74,000 pages today. In fact, when stacked, it now reaches a height of more than the original documented tax code, the Babylonian Code of Hammurabi, which was carved in stone about 4,000 years ago. So here's another fun story. There's a company called Here Life, which so exchanging information for goods and services is really the basis of their business. And what it does is it affords students at universities like the University of Illinois and Kansas, they give them special iPads and shared automobiles and swank apartments in new buildings in which like their every movement, well, almost every movement is tracked and recorded. And in turn, what Here Life does is it markets and analyzes this information and makes it available to major consumer brands. Again, not the detailed data, but the aggregate data. And so in return, this free housing, is exchanged for some of your kids' personal information. If this sounds kind of similar, we do this at the grocery store almost every week. And so when you go into the grocery store, you're scanning your loyalty card in return for what's called a discount. But what really is happening is it's not a discount. We're exchanging information about us and our purchase for free food. They call it a discount to make us feel better about it, but what's really happening is it's a barter transaction, like I discussed earlier, where we're exchanging information about us for free goods. And then the grocery store monetizes that in ways that we probably don't know, or maybe even don't want to know in some cases. Another retail story here, but again, think about how you might do this in your organization. This is really cool. Your traditionally favorable terms and conditions are offered to customers in good standing based on kind of these guaranteed purchase volumes, but more often they're based on the exchange of information. The contract terms aside, the exchange of information among trading partners facilitates improved relationships, and this transparency breeds trust, and really nothing embodies transparency better than the flow of information among business partners. So this company called Direct Eats, which is an online marketplace for healthy living food and other products, it capitalized on this opportunity to provide a multitude of mostly small suppliers with invaluable data from and about buyers. And in a classic, what I call a win-win-win triple play, it devised this mechanism for capturing feedback from consumers in return for discounts. So I give you information about your products, I get free stuff in return, and then the data and comparative insights were made available to the suppliers, generally kind of small mom and pop shops, who otherwise couldn't really gather that data. But they didn't stop there. The chief revenue officer realized that this data in aggregate would also be valuable to major manufacturers of snacks who weren't Direct Eats customers, folks like Kraft and Nabisco. I'm sorry, they weren't suppliers, to help them kind of understand emerging markets for healthy snacks and lifestyles. So again, I call this kind of a triple play, win-win-win, and it's something that really any organization can do. Here's kind of a more direct model. When we think about monetizing data, this is probably the kind of thing that comes to mind first. So in just 1 year, the discount retailer Dollar General realized a net income of over 120% with about a 10% increase in same-store sales. The results, what they did was they analyzed they analyzed and determined how to optimize store opening and closure times in various communities, rather than kind of having a blanket, we're always open at 9 a.m. and we always close at 9 p.m. kind of thing. So the results were mostly due to this project where they shared 45 terabytes of data with 70 billion rows of data, about 12 billion in sales from nearly 9,000 stores. But as an astute marketer of hundreds of thousands of products, it saw one more product to sell, its data. So soon they started selling data to its CPG supply companies to see how their goods were selling. And for a premium, they could actually benchmark themselves against their competitors. And so they actually now have a self-funding data warehouse, or probably now a data lake. And so we talk about migrating from a cost center to a value center or a profit center. This is a classic example of that. By making data available to those throughout their extended business ecosystem, they're able to self-fund that data warehouse. All right, so some years ago, I gave a presentation on dark data and was discussing the concept of data that you're kind of sitting on, that you're not using, that maybe you've used for a single purpose and kind of forgotten about. And so somebody in the audience asked, what dark data could we possibly have? And I said, you're probably sitting on, he was a CIO of one of the big 4 consulting firms, and I said, you're probably sitting on 10 or 20 years of archived emails, right? And if you analyze those emails to understand kind of what was being communicated among people on projects, that were related to projects that suffered from scope or budget or personnel or technology related issues, you'd be able to create some kind of early warning signals for projects. I'm not talking about spying on employees, but kind of what phrases and words are being used that were correlated to the kinds of issues that you see on projects. And rather than waiting for somebody to type up a status report and then somebody to aggregate those status reports and type up more status reports and then send them to their manager, you could actually automate this. So this is Lockheed went and took this idea and they're, I'm not going to give you all the details there, but as a result, they're able to now detect specific signatures of programs that are predicted to degrade in the performance with, oh, did I skip the Lockheed one? Hold on, there we go. To degrade in performance with these manageable false positive rates while decreasing the amount of historical data required to analyze this by a third. And so by monetizing their project information in this way, emails and documents and so forth, Lockheed Martin now has a 300% improved foresight into program assessments and claims they're saving hundreds of millions of dollars in cost overruns, which is all great because as taxpayers, we are Lockheed's only customer. So DBS Bank in Singapore, 30,000 hours. This is how much time customers had been inconvenienced while empty automated teller machines, ATMs, were waiting to be reloaded throughout Singapore. They have like 25 million transactions a month and 4 million customers across the country and over 1,000 ATMs. And so rather than potentially losing customers, they decided to put them front and center. What would happen is that previously ATMs would often run out of cash prior to the scheduled reload time, or the ATM reloading personnel would show up at machines like during peak usage times, like during lunch or hours in the business district. So what they did was they built a model to forecast the withdrawal activity and optimize machine loading times. This solution incorporates machine learning and logistics concepts, operations research, and forecasting and queuing theory to optimize its ATM loading processes. And as a result, they've been able to reduce 90%, cash outs have been reduced by 90%, and 20% of the replenishment trips have been eliminated. Also, the amount of leftover cash returning to the bank following a replenishment is down by 40%. Couple more. So risk and fraud. Today, when we think about fraud and risk, it's often in the context of bank fraud or Medicare fraud. Sure, there are great examples of anti-money laundering stemming synthetic fraud. Look that one up if you don't know what that is. It's fascinating. But let's discuss one that's a bit more slimy than that. So the city of New York has several thousand miles of water mains and tunnels. And commercial businesses are required to install what are called grease interceptors to separate oils and fats and grease from the wastewater and prevent the grease from entering the sewer systems, the city's sewer systems. And increasingly, city inspectors have been discovering that sewer pipes were clogged with hardened grease, which restricts the flow of wastewater, leading to backups and all sorts of nastiness in restaurants. And the city estimates that over 60% of the sewer backups are caused by improperly dumped grease, particularly by restaurants. So instead of pulling up every manhole in the city, the health department enlisted the Office of Policy and Strategic Planning. They call it kind of a geek squad of civic-minded number crunchers. They call this working from a pair of cluttered cubicles across the city hall. Anyway, what they did was they unearthed data from an obscure agency which certifies restaurant grease carting services, and they layered geospatial data of restaurants that don't have a grease carting contract to that of nearby sewers. And then the team was able to give inspectors a list of suspected derelict restaurants and clogged sewers. And sure enough, this simple integration of data, of disparate data sources, yielded a 95% success rate in tracking down grease dumpers, which resulted in an increase of 2 million gallons of sewer capacity by removing 30 million pounds of debris and saving millions on things like random inspections and sewer cleanings. So we also talk about data for good. There's a big movement toward data for good, using your data to help the community, not just by public organizations, but also by commercial organizations as well. But this is more of a kind of a public story. So from 2007 to 2014, South Africa experienced an exponential rise in rhino poaching. a growth of over 9,000%. And so now they have a system that can track the movement and patterns, not of rhinos, but of smaller neighboring animals as they respond to the presence of human intruders anywhere in the reserve. What it does is it monitors and collects information related to the animal's location and movement and direction and speed of travel, along with other data covering this range. And so this data is kind of a leading indicator of where the poachers are headed and where the rhinos may be. So this data has been used to develop analytic models and understand patterns, specifically for helping to predict, where they're in possible danger. This has resulted in a 15% decline in poaching the next couple of years when this went into place, following a 9,000 increase of poaching previously. All right. So what are some common threads here in all these examples? I think what I'll just blow this up here. So what we find is that there's some common threads. They're very functionally specific, they're vocational, they're not necessarily big enterprise-wide, blah, blah, blah kinds of data warehouses. Some are, some aren't. Many focus on insight and foresight, not on historical reporting. They're very transformational. The analytics is actionable. The organization was primed culturally and otherwise to take advantage of the insights, not just look at them and go, oh, well, that's interesting. There's also a use of a wide variety of data, most often from external data sources. And then the analytic models that are being developed are what we call driver-based models that look at leading indicators, not just kind of projecting historical numbers based on kind of staring at our own navel, but looking externally at what are the drivers of our business. I just want to finish up with a few thoughts on Infonomics. I mentioned one of these concepts earlier on. Organizations that optimize data deployment have turned data into a monetizable asset. And whether they consciously know it or not, they often capitalize on these three main differentiators of data and aren't stuck still thinking about data as new oil. It's hard to go like a week without hearing somebody talk about that. And it certainly represents that somebody understands that data has value, but it entirely misses the point that data has these unique characteristics that go well beyond oil. You can use it simultaneously for multiple purposes. You can't use a drop of oil multiple ways. When you consume a drop of oil, generally it dissipates. It turns into heat and energy and pollution, right? And then you can use it. You can use information again and again. And also, when you use oil, it doesn't generate more oil. But when you use data, typically you're generating more data. When you use it as part of a business process, you're in a prime position to capture more data about how that data was used or information about that process, what customers did, how they reacted, how machines performed, and so forth. How your supply chain has been optimized. So there's all sorts of new data that can be collected when you deploy new data. There are other unique characteristics of data that make it very different than oil, but these are the three big ones. And organizations that really get this, whether it's conscious or not, are the ones that are really thriving today in the information age. There are also some advanced, Infonomics ideas, and the basics of this. I'm not going to get into details, but traditional economic models were designed ages ago, for traditional products and services, physical and financial services, and even more recently in the 1960s, kind of human capital. Today, we're in the midst of this information economy, and it really requires us to reconsider these concepts in light of information. Do they still apply? Do they break down completely if we substitute information for guns and butter, if you remember your Econ 101? So there's a lot we can learn about how to manage the supply of information, how to increase its demand, how to price and value it accordingly, how to use it to affect behaviors internally and externally, how to understand our organization's relative maturity and be heads up to the ethical and other kind of data related risks. You may know or not that I teach a course on Infonomics at the University of Illinois' Geese Business School. And we're continuing to develop ideas. I'm working with my students to develop all sorts of new ideas about how to apply economic concepts, how to model the value of data. Just this last week, they went out and modeled the data value for dozens of companies. And so it's really great work. And I think we're just kind of at the beginning of all of this. And it's really exciting times. But not to get all academic, I think that companies kind of intrinsically somewhat get this, and some business leaders and data leaders do. But I think really it's incumbent to kind of drill down into this a little bit more and truly understand the economics of information a lot better than we've ever been taught traditionally. In fact, we have come to a conclusion in our class that traditional economic textbooks need to be rewritten. All right, so I'm going to wrap up just with an idea, with just an overview of our approach at Caserta to data monetization, and then I'll take a few questions. And really, there's kind of 3 phases to this. There it is. The first is kind of to run some workshops and understand and generate ideas. This involves some ideation, sharing examples from other industries and teasing them apart. It involves doing a feasibility assessment, looking at the economic feasibility, the managerial feasibility, the operational feasibility, technical feasibility. We look at like a dozen different kinds of feasibility characteristics to help prioritize these ideas. Of course, one of them is, as I mentioned, financial. So we're looking at what's the value proposition of delivering some kind of data or data product versus the cost of doing so. And then we'll develop and test those ideas. Next, we move into a phase where we're kind of determining how do we package that data. Is it raw data we're providing, or is it analyzed or pre-aggregated or combined in some way for particular purposes? Then we'll go through the process of identifying, curating the data assets that we need, developing the data products, establishing the underlying architectural components, sometimes building a data warehouse or data lake to support it. And then what are the ongoing requirements for managing and monitoring the solution? You'll notice that what we're doing here is we're taking a product management approach, and there's no real surprise here. If you really want to monetize data or monetize anything, you should be taking a product management approach to this. And then, finally, we get into the more kind of the technical aspects of architecting things and implementing and testing the new offerings and so forth. But again, at the end of the day, it's a product management approach with kind of some nuances that are distinct to data as a product. So I'm going to kind of leave you all with that, and I think we've got 5 or 7 minutes left for some questions. If anyone has any, if not, you're free to go. And I hope this has been fun and interesting, and not too much of not too fast. You could always watch it on replay and figure out how to slow it down if you want, or even better, give us a call, and we're happy to work with you.
All right, thank you so much, Doug. That was a great presentation. I love the bit about the grease in the New York City sewer system. You put data in the new oil in a new light.
Is that why you moved from New York to California?
No, I remember though, back in London in 2010, they had the problem, and it was a huge mountain of it, and so they called it a fatberg, and they had to
I've heard that term.
It was terrible, disgusting photos, but they did succeed. One quick announcement, then we'll go to questions. First of all, before I do it, please ask any questions you want in the questions panel in your right, and Mr. Laney will answer them. If we don't get to you, we'll email you with the answer. The MIT symposium that I referenced in the beginning, where actually I first met Doug, it's coming up this year on August 18th. This is the first year in its illustrious history that it will sadly not be on campus at MIT in Cambridge due to the pandemic affecting us around the globe, but rather, like many other events, be taken virtually online. So number one, I would love for all of you to attend. It is an excellent, educational, insightful affair. Doug will be presenting. Our founding CEO, Joe Caserta, will be presenting. You will love it. We are happy to give away 25% off deals to this event. I think right now it's going for $745 a ticket. And as a sign of thanks for all of you who are still listening to me right now on the line, I'm going to give one of you a free pass, which I will raffle away. And that leaves time for exactly one question that we'll answer live. You can still email us.
Stump the consultant.
Here we go. And if you last to the very end of this question, one of you will get that free pass. Bear with me one moment. Let's choose a good one.
Hit me. And I'm happy to blog them
time for two questions.
Or post on LinkedIn about the rest of them. So if we don't get to some of them, Remy, share them with me, and I'll put out some LinkedIn posts.
All right, so I'll ask two questions. You have 2.5 minutes to answer. So number one, how do you know how much your data that you want to monetize is worth? Great question. So I don't know if you have 2.5 minutes. Let's go.
All right, we've developed a variety of ways to quantify the value of data. There's some ways that we can look at it more predictively, like based on its quality characteristics or its impact on key performance indicators or its business relevancy. We can also measure the value of data using the same or similar kinds of models as how we value any other kind of asset by looking at its cost basis, its market value, and we've got some models on how to quantify its market value, which gets kind of interesting because typically when you're selling data or license your data, you're not transferring ownership of it, you're transferring rights to use it. So you can transfer those rights multiple times. So how do you optimize that curve? And then third is we can look at information's contribution to revenue stream or expense savings. Basically, it's economic value add. So we've published models on how to do that, and in previous webinars, we've gone into details on that, and details are also in my book.
All right, and
Next.
last question. This is slightly long, so we're gonna do the short and dirty version.
Right.
Doug, what experiences have you had with monetizing data internally within an organization?
Yeah.
As with many businesses and orgs, we often struggle with valuing data to evaluate data management improvement projects.
Yeah, so I didn't make this point earlier, or if I did, I didn't emphasize it. Even if you're using data internally, you cannot claim you're monetizing unless you measure its contribution. So how is that data or the analytics based on that data driving improved decisions? How are those improved decisions then leading to improvements in, top or bottom line financials? Or how is using data translated into improved business process performance? And so if you're not connecting those dots in some way, then you're really in a poor position to claim that you're monetizing data. So we encourage you to do those measurements. And again, we've developed ways to do just that.
All right.
All right.
Mr. Laney, it is always a pleasure hearing you present. Thank you for those amazing use cases. And
Thanks,
everyone,
everyone.
thank you for coming. Tune in next time.
Take care. Have a great holiday weekend for those of you in the States, and stay safe. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.